With Vue Style Guidist now installed and running, let's start documenting our components, beginning with the cart item component that you see on the screen here. Similar to API Doc, Vue Style Guidist is going to scan our component files and pass the doc blocks in order to populate the documentation. The difference between the two, though, is that Vue Style Guidist doesn't strictly rely on block tags. What's just as important is the context of the doc block. For example, in order to provide a general description of a component, you need to put a doc block directly above the export definition. So let's go ahead and add a doc block up here. And we'll provide a general description, cart item. Now there are some block tags that Vue Style Guidist recognizes. For example, we can put a version tag here, and let's give that a value of 1.0.0. Looking at the doc site again and going to the cart item section, you can see the documentation has now been updated to include the info that we just put in that doc block. One of the most important aspects of a component to document is its inputs. And the most common way to provide input to a component is with props. So to document props, you need to put a doc block directly above the prop that you want to document. So let's come down here and document the ID prop and put a block tag directly above it. And now what you want to do is add a description of that prop. So remember that the ID prop of this cart item component is used to query Vuex ORM for an item model instance. So let's make the description simply item ID. Once the site rebuilds, we can now come to the props, methods, events, and slots heading. And if we click that, you'll see that the ID prop has now been documented. What's interesting though is that Vue Style Guidist is able to partially auto-document the prop by using the prop definition. So in addition to the description that we've created, you'll also see the name, the type, the default value, and whether it's required or not. And we didn't explicitly provide any of that information. Let's now document the input mixin file. Now the great thing about documenting mixins is that the documentation will automatically flow through to all the components that use it. In this case, that's going to be all of the form inputs. So let's begin by adding a doc block above the external errors prop here. Now, this prop allows the parent component to pass in external errors to an input. So let's give this one a description, a reactive array of error message strings that get merged with local error messages. Next, we're going to add documentation to the ID prop. Now this prop is used to link the input to a model instance. So the description for this one can be the ID of the model instance. And we'll also add documentation to the model prop. And the description will be the Vuex ORM model that the input will bind to. We can also document events triggered from our components, such as this one in the errors watch method down here. Now this method gets called whenever the errors array is mutated and the data emitted with the event includes the input's name and whether or not the input has errors. So let's place a doc block directly above this line and we're going to put a description error event. Now we're going to also document the event arguments, starting with this one here, which is the name. So what we'll do is we're going to add a property tag, and the first value to put after this is the data type, which is going to be a string, followed by the name, which will just be name, and finally the description, which will be input name. Let's also add a second property tag, and this will be for the second argument down here, and this one is going to be a Boolean. And the name of this one is in error, and the description will be indicates if the input is in error. Once that code rebuilds, let's take a look at any one of our input components now. Say input email, and if we check the props, methods, events, and slots, you'll see that all of our props, as well as the event, have now been documented. One reason developers may want component documentation is to get an example of how a component can or should be used. For this reason, we're going to provide one or more usage examples of each component in our style guide. So we can do this right from within our single file component files by going to the bottom and adding a docs tag. Now we can add markdown content to the docs tag, and Vue Style Guidist will use that as part of the component documentation. So let's begin by adding a markdown header here, which will make usage example. We're then going to add an HTML code block within that. And inside that code block, we're going to put an example of how this component should be used. So in the case of the cart item, we can just go cart item and close the component like that. And of course, we'll also need to include the ID prop. So let's pretend that there's an ID value present in the context and bind to it. So we'll just go bind ID to ID like that. Looking at the cart item in the style guide site now, you can see that the markdown has been passed and inserted into the docs, and we see our usage example.